Welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, presented by Command Presence Training and hosted by CEO Michael Warren. At Command Presence, we believe leadership comes down to two things: people and action. In each episode, we sit down with leaders from across professions and communities who are stepping up, making a difference, and leading where they are with what they have. Together, we'll explore the lessons they've learned, the challenges they've faced, and the decisions that shaped their leadership journey. Because the ultimate question isn't just what we can learn from them, it's what we can learn from each other. As we strive to become the leader we wish we had. Today, Michael is joined by Kevin Rhea for episode 28, Beyond Compliance, Building Credibility Through Leadership.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Faces of Leadership. I hope you had a chance to listen to our last episode, which was the guys from Strategic Communications, Rusty Byers. Rusty's an interesting guy. When you listen to his background as a Marine, the fact that he was chosen for such a high-profile position as a young man kind of was prophetic of how his life was going to end up, because he is certainly making impact now. If you haven't listened to the episode, be sure to go back and listen to it. I promise you it will be worth your time. But today, we have a new guest on, and this guy is also a friend of mine, and many of you are probably starting to think that I'm lying about things because you don't believe that I have this many friends. But Kevin Rhea is the founder of the National Association of Accreditation Leadership. We'll tell you a little bit more about that one coming up here in a little bit, but he's also a law enforcement veteran, and he's got over 30 years working in the public safety sector. A lot of those were spent on the accreditation side. He and I were academy classmates. I like to say that he carried me. He says that I carried him. Truth of the matter is, we were probably leaning against each other as we made our way through the academy. But Kevin is a dedicated public servant, and Kevin shows that dedication in a variety of ways. He currently lives out in Arizona with his wife, Robin, who you probably have already guessed is the better half of that couple. But he does a lot of stuff out there. He works in his church. He also does some work. There's a spring training, Go Baseball, facility right now beside him where he is actually a volunteer, and he heads up the volunteers at the facility for the Kansas City Royals and the Texas Rangers. You've heard me say it before. I'm a big baseball fan, so I'm really jealous of that. But today we're going to talk about several things, but let's go ahead and bring him on board. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it. And you're right. We did spend a lot of our career together, leaning against one another and learning from one another.
Yeah, folks, to be clear, you probably can figure it out from the pictures before you right now. When we were in the academy and we weren't allowed facial hair and we were leaning against each other, we probably resembled Siamese twins, but that's okay. But let's go ahead and let's start talking about this. So Kevin, why public safety? What was it that drew you to the profession way back in the day, back in the 1900s, as the young folks say?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in the city that we served in the city of Novi, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. And growing up in that town, I had a police officer that lived right down the street from us, and so I would see him come home with his squad car and in his uniform, and it was something that I always wanted to do from the time that I was very young. And it's funny because my wife jokes all the time about I knew what I wanted to do since I was 5 years old, and many people don't know what they want to do even after they graduate from college. So I knew what I wanted to do. And he gave me some of the best advice. His name was Charlie Brown. And he gave me some of the best advice that I had, because I told him as I was progressing through high school that as soon as I graduated from high school and turned 18, that I was going to go to the Detroit Police Academy. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to go to college and you're going to get your bachelor's degree. And then you're going to come back and you're going to work for the city of Novi, because we were one of the few cities in the state of Michigan that required a bachelor's degree for all of their police officers. And so I took his advice, and it turned out to be the best advice that he could have given me.
Yeah, things worked out pretty well, didn't they?
It sure did. Sure did.
So our careers, we served in patrol together. We served in investigations together. We served as sergeants together. And at some point, though, you got involved, got the agency involved, if you will, in this accreditation process. For those listeners who maybe don't understand what that is, kind of give me a thumbnail view of what it means to be an accredited agency.
Yeah, so first let me back up a little bit and kind of complete that circle. So you're right, we did serve in all of those roles together, but the one step that you kind of glossed over, was the fact that the agency created a position of training and standards sergeant, and that position was responsible for all of the agency training as well as professional standards and special projects. And you were the very first training and standards sergeant in the history of the agency. And you served in that role for a number of years. And then I was the second person in that position and taking over after you. And, I always say that it's easier to be the first person in a position because you can create the position to be whatever you want it to be. It was more difficult for me trying to follow in your footsteps because you had done such an amazing job in that training position. So besides the training aspect and the professional standards aspect, one of the things that we did was we got the agency involved in accreditation. And more specifically, CALEA, which is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, which is the national gold standard, if you will, of police accreditation. And really what it does is it looks at, there were 462 standards at the time, 462 standards of best practices. And we needed to ensure that all of those standards were met, not only in our policies, but also in our practice. It's one thing to have it in your policy and say that you do those things, but it's another thing to be able to prove compliance, to really prove that you're following your policies. And so that was a 3-year project to be able to not only have it in our policy, but to be able to prove that we're actually doing it.
Well, and Kevin, I guess the part of the things about being new in a position or undertaking a new project is that sometimes it's a period of discovery, if you will. And so the position was named Training and Standards. And I didn't realize at the time how important it was that it said and rather than or, because you really can't have one without the other, as the old song goes. Or in the words of the great American philosopher Forrest Gump, they go together like peas and carrots. So kind of explain to me what you and I, we've had many discussions on this, what we mean by you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, that's really a great point, because if you look at our careers, and there's no greater example, I think, than you and I, because if you look at our careers kind of mirrored one another, well, almost you can say competitively, but our careers mirrored one another until we got to that training and standards position. And you took much more of an interest in the training side of that position. And I took much more of an interest in the standards side of that position. But you're absolutely right. You can't have one without the other. You can't have good, valid, defensible training without standards. And you can't prove compliance with training standards without good training. So you and I have often discussed about, the accreditation manager and the training manager should really be, if they're not the same person, they should be sitting in the same office.
Yes.
They should be sharing an office, because that's how closely they work together. Now, it just so happened in our agency that it was the same person. Now that we've left and we've retired, Now I think that there are two different people doing the training job and doing the accreditation job. But, you can't have good training, defensible training without training standards, and you can't have a good, solid proving of accreditation standards without good training.
It's interesting to me that our agency underwent a national accreditation process, but then went back and also got the state one that is done through the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police. And I think a lot of people at the time kind of questioned that. But in addition to the standards, would you agree that being part of those processes, that you oftentimes are exposed to trends that maybe are happening either in the nation or in the state that just haven't come to your area yet? And it's almost like an early warning system that's provided by these programs in addition to the standards that they require.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that a national program has is they have to write standards. Now, let me just back up and kind of explain to your audience kind of where CALIA came from and where this idea of national standards came from. So, back in 1979, after all of the race riots of the late 60s, after the commission that President Johnson put together to try to professionalize the police, there were four major organizations, law enforcement organizations. That's the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Sheriff's Association, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and the Police Executive Research Forum. Those four organizations got together and created the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, or CALIA. And when they did that, they impaneled a group of subject matter experts to write these standards. Now, over time, these standards have evolved as new technology and new ways of doing things have taken place. But one of the challenges that a national program like that has always suffered from is the fact that what works in Birmingham, Michigan may not work in Birmingham, Alabama, right? So, in order to kind of take some of those into account, normally state chiefs associations have picked up some of those challenges and said, we want to create a state law enforcement accreditation program that takes into account some of the laws, some of the statutes, some of the customs that are specific to our state and create an accreditation program. Now, we still believe that, some of the standards that are national standards still apply in our state, but there are a number of standards that are specific to our state that don't necessarily apply other places. And that's where this idea of state accreditation came from. So after we received our national accreditation from CALIA, there was still this idea that we should be dual accredited because there were additional state standards that CALIA didn't account for. So we went back and got accredited through the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police.
And so, Kevin, right now you live in the state of Arizona. You chose to do that. And as we're recording this, it feels like the state of Arizona weather has migrated north into Michigan, where I live, and I'm not a big fan of it. But, there are certain things that take place in states that maybe don't take place in others. In Michigan, you have cold water rescue, and you've got snowmobiles and stuff like that, where when I go down and my friends down at Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, fantastic group that I've been doing some work with, they have bad things there, Kevin, like gators and snakes, lots of snakes. It's all bad. And they've got these swamp vehicles, for lack of a better term. So there are, while policing is roughly the same, there are some nuances that are state specific, and those programs allow that. And it's the accreditation. What would you agree with me? Sir Robert Peel talked about the father of modern day policing. He had the Peelian principles, and he talked about credibility, and accreditation really does help an agency remain relevant and still have the trust of the community, because they can show tangibly what they're doing to maintain that trust. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, the other thing that it does is it shows a willingness on the part of the agency to open themselves up to inspection by people not affiliated with that agency.
Uh, Would you agree with me that it's a little bit akin to somebody calling up the IRS and say, "Hey, you know what? I'd really like you to audit my books." Most of us, we don't do that because we don't want the IRS taking any closer look. Not that we're doing anything illegal, if you're listening, IRS, but the thing is, though, it's that proactive, voluntary opening of come and take a look and dig the corners. You know, shine the light in areas that maybe the light hasn't been shined ever, or even recently, and inviting those folks in to say, "Hey, you need to do some work here. Hey, you're doing really good there."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, let me get back to your state point for just 1 minute, because uh, when I retired from the police department in Michigan and I was getting ready to move to the state of Arizona, it had always been mine and my wife's plan to move out here. But just before I retired, I received a call one night from the president of the executive director of the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police, and he said, "Kevin, you're moving to Arizona, right?" And I said, "Yes, Chief, I am." He's like, "I got the perfect job for you." I said, "Okay, what perfect job do you have for me?" And I was waiting for, the chief of some community college or something like that. And he's like, "No, the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police they want to start an accreditation program, but they don't have anybody out there that knows anything about accreditation. And I think that you'd be perfect for the job." And so he had a conversation with the executive director in Arizona. I applied for the position, had a couple of interviews. So before I actually retired from my agency, um, I had received a job offer from the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police to start a state level accreditation program in the state of Arizona. So fast forward a month, I retire. I drive all of our personal belongings out here to the state of Arizona. 2 days later, I meet with the executive director and the chief who was in charge of the accreditation program. They hand me a 3-ring binder. They say, now this is July 6th, so it's coming up on 8 years now. He hands me a 3-ring binder and says, "These are our standards, build a program around it, and we want agencies enrolled by September." So I had about 90 days to figure out how to create an accreditation program. Ran that program for about 6 years before I turned it over to some new leadership. But I tell that story because when we start talking about differences between the state program and national program, I'll give you a very clear example. The state of Arizona, and a lot of your listeners may not realize this, 40% of the state of Arizona is tribal land. We have 21 federally recognized tribes in the state of Arizona, 18 of which have their own police department. So, with that much tribal land in the state of Arizona, when we created our standards, we had an entire chapter devoted to policing in Indian country. How do state and local police departments interact with tribal police departments? Now, that's something that you will find in no other accreditation program on this planet. But we created it specifically for the state of Arizona because there is so much interaction between the municipal police departments and the tribal police departments. So that is a very clear example of the need for these state level programs.
Well, and as a training guy, one of the things that I love about programs, whether they're national or state, is that they do have training mandates as part of their standards. And you alluded to it earlier that How can you have standards without training, and how can you have training without standards? It's unfortunate, but there are some agencies that that probably wouldn't be doing the amount or quality of training that they're doing if there wasn't that mandate in the process.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So
And then what happens is the state tries to force agencies to do it. They force agencies, they write legislation, whether it be through their post or whether it be through their legislature. They write laws forcing continuing education on agencies, but then these are all unfunded mandates. And so it's really left up to the agency about how are you going to comply with these laws. And then they send in auditors, and how are you going to prove compliance with whether or not, and then what happens if you don't? Are you going to have officers that are going to be decertified? Are they going to be pulled off the road until the training's completed? Unless an agency takes a proactive approach to training and making sure that all of the training standards are met, it could really end up in some devastating consequences.
well, and once the community finds out about that, they find out that their agency is staffed by people who aren't trained. It really can detract from the legitimacy that the agency has with the community they're supposed to serve.
Not only the community, but once the jury finds
Oh,
out.
absolutely. And the jury could be criminal or civil or both, and that can be devastating.
Yeah, yeah. As part of my position now with the association, I've been teaching a policy writing class all around the country over the last month or so, and I always ask the same question. What are the first three things that you're going to receive a FOIA request for? And they ask different questions, but the first three things are going to be number one, your body camera. Number two is going to be your policy, and number three is going to be your the written report. Because what the attorney is going to do is they're going to watch the video and they're going to compare it to your report. And if there's any discrepancy, you have a problem. And then if they read the report and they look at the body camera and then they review your policy and they find a problem, then you really have a problem. Then they're going to come back and they're going to ask for a couple things. They're going to ask for your training records. They're going to ask for your disciplinary file. And then they've got you. Okay? Because we all understand what the purpose of policy is, right? Whether you're coming at this from a training perspective or whether you're coming at this from an accreditation or professional standards perspective. The purpose of policy, the sole purpose of policy, is to set the guidelines of acceptable behavior. Okay? As long as an officer, as long as an employee operates within those guidelines of acceptable behavior, they're going to be good.
Mhm.
As soon as you start to operate outside of those guidelines of acceptable behavior, one of three things better happen. You either better have permission, you either better have a good reason, or you better have a good attorney. One of those three things better happen.
Well, so from a leadership perspective, if you had an audience with a chief or a sheriff, how important is it that you have well-written policies, that you're intentional about what's in the policy, who's writing the policy, because it shouldn't just be it should be very intentional, is the word I keep coming back to. But oftentimes policy manuals are developed haphazardly. What would you tell a chief or a sheriff about having a good policy writer?
Well, first of all, it's critical. Second of all, to be a good policy writer, you don't need to be an attorney. You need to have common sense. Okay? The problem that we've seen with policy manuals is they've exploded, right? Now they're 1,000, 2,000 pages. A policy manual was never designed to be a how to do your job guide. Okay? A policy manual was designed to set the guidelines of acceptable behavior. Your how-to guide is your FTO manual. Okay? If you don't know how to do your job once you get out of FTO, then maybe you need to be recycled a couple more times. Okay. Your policy manual is never set to be a how-to guide. The other problem that we've seen lately is this. The administration writes these policies in conference rooms, right? So there's a couple of issues with that. Number one is they try to write policy to dictate outcomes. And so they write policy to say, if this happens, then you do this. But then if this happens, then do this. But if this doesn't happen, then do this. You can't write policy to dictate an outcome. The only thing that's going to do is set your agency and your employees up for failure. So what you want to do is you want to set your agency and your employees up for success. So don't try to remove their discretion. Set the guidelines for acceptable behavior. And remember that you're writing these policies in a conference room, not on the street. Your policies need to be written for that police officer on the scene at 2:00 in the morning. Because if they don't understand it on the scene at 2:00 in the morning, you might as well not even have it written down.
Absolutely. And so from my side of things, one of the biggest issues I've seen policy wise, and our friend Eric Daigle, who is an expert in this field, he is an attorney, but he's also a former practitioner of the profession. But he really cautions against knee-jerk policies where you will have an anomalous event occur and there is this rush to try to address every potential aspect of that in a policy. And oftentimes in the rush, the probably the most important question to ask is, do we need a policy for this? Because we don't need a policy for everything.
Yeah, yeah. And Eric is a great friend and a great friend of the association, and we really appreciate the partnership that he has with our association. But Eric is absolutely right. The first question that leaders need to ask themselves is, number one, do we need this policy or is this a one-off event? And then the next question they have to ask themselves is this failure that we now want to write a policy about, is it as a result of poor supervision? Is it a result of poor training? Is it a result of, not understanding, the policy and what they expect? Because, let's face it, all too often we have police officers that, especially now with electronic acknowledgement of policies, they're just putting their initials on policies, and they're not even reading the policies. So, is this a training issue? Is this a supervision issue? Because not every policy failure needs to result in a new policy.
Absolutely. But I think you left one thing out, and this was an important one right here. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves, is this a hiring issue? And it's ironic because there was a hiring issue that really kind of spurred, if you will, a major undertaking on your behalf. So why don't you explain that to us?
Yeah, you saw me just shift in my seat when you said something about a hiring issue. This really comes back to my personal why. Simon Sinek said, to find your why, your purpose. And this is my personal why. So I do have my bachelor's in criminal justice from Ferris State University. I have my master's in public administration from Eastern Michigan University. I had always wanted to go back and get my doctorate. But my wife, who's very pragmatic, said your next wife can pay for that. So that kind of put that idea off for about 10 years. But then in January of 2023, Tyree Nichols was killed by 5 members of the Memphis Police Department. Looking at the background and history of the 5 officers of the Memphis Police Scorpion Unit. Each one of those officers had red flags in their backgrounds. One of them had been in jail before. Another one had disciplinary issues at a prior employer. They all had issues in their background and probably should have never been in that position as a police officer to begin with. So that was really the why, because I knew that incident jarred me in such a way that I knew that I needed to make some type of difference in this profession that I claimed to love so dearly and had given me so much in my life. And so it was the very next day that I enrolled in a PhD program at Liberty University. I'm now in the research phase of my dissertation. I will have my PhD completed here in the next 2 months, and then I'll have the professional credentials to back up some of my research and some of the things that I talk about at different national conferences and around the country. So, background hiring, that really led to my why.
Well, and it's interesting that you talked about credentials, because accreditation is very similar in that way, and that it's a credential that provides legitimacy for an agency, where degrees provide in certain circles and in certain areas legitimacy for the individual, and we have to, as professionals, be asking ourselves, what can I do so that people trust me more? And nobody, you're never going to get to the point where everyone trusts you, but will the community trust me more as a result of this activity, this personal activity, or will they trust me less? But we also, as professionals, have to ask ourselves, will people internally trust me more as a result of this, or will they trust me less? And it's not about people pleasing. It's about adding credibility and defensibility to what we do and how we do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of the association, I'm actually teaching a class today called Building Your Personal Brand. And a lot of people in public safety don't realize that you are building your personal brand every day. Every email, every phone call, every conversation that you have, you're building your personal brand. Are you somebody that people can count on? Are you somebody that people trust? Are you somebody that people come to for advice? You're building your personal brand every single day. And so what are you doing personally to build that brand? This is not about being a social media influencer. This is not about being self-promoting. This is about, are you being seen? When your chief and the command staff have a meeting and your name comes up, what are some of the terms that are used when they bring your name up? So how are you building your personal brand? Because I'll never forget this. I served on an oral board for a promotional exam for another agency, for a nearby agency that we were working with, and one of the questions that we ask all the time is, what have you done to prepare yourself for this opportunity? And you sit back and you wait for their answers, like, these are the books that I've read, these are the courses that I've taken, I went back to school to get this degree. And I had somebody sit there and look me dead in the eyes and say, I went to every training class my agency sent me to.
Yeah.
And I said, no, what have you done to prepare yourself? They took absolutely zero responsibility and accountability for their own professional development.
Well, when you talk about brand, I love the show The Big Bang Theory. And Sheldon Cooper, Dr. Sheldon Cooper, is one of my favorite characters, and he's talking about Pringles, how much he loves Pringles. And the thing that he loves about them the most is uniformity. And a brand isn't necessarily about uniformity, it's about consistency. The United States Marine Corps, not every Marine is the same, but there is a brand that they have created, that they have cultivated over centuries now. And people know what the Marine Corps is about. Coca-Cola, that it's not uniformity because they have different brands underneath the large brand, just like an agency does. They've got regular Coke, they've got Diet Coke, where in a policing organization, you'll have patrol and you'll have corrections and you'll have investigations, and they're not exactly the same, but they are consistent. And the accreditation process, it seems to require a consistency across the organization that maybe would be lacking otherwise.
Yeah, so here's the challenge that accreditation is facing. And this is really the gap that I identified when we created the association is all too often accreditation is viewed by agencies as other duties as assigned, right? It just gets assigned to somebody, whether it gets assigned to a sworn officer, whether it gets assigned to a command officer, whether it gets assigned to one of the professional staff. It's just other duties as assigned. The problem with that is that means that accreditation is just being used as a checkbox. Are we meeting these standards? So accreditation is not really being used for its intended purpose, meaning are we using these standards to really make meaningful change within our organization? Are we allowing the standards to change how we do things, to change the culture in our agency, to make things better? So, for example, the accreditation manager should be the risk managers in the agency because they're the ones that identify the gaps in policy and practice. They should be the advisors to the chiefs, the CEOs. They should be letting the chiefs know, hey, this is where the gaps are and this is what we need to do to fill them. They're the ones that are ultimately going to be kind of the eyes and ears of the administration. Because going back to our policy thing, the problem with writing policies in a conference room is you end up with something called the shadow policy. And the shadow policy is kind of like when you get out of the academy, when we got out of the academy and you get into the FTO program, and the very first day you get into the FTO program with somebody who's been working the road for 20 years, and they go, hey, you spent the last 16, 18 weeks in the police academy, forget about all that stuff. Now I'm going to teach you how to be a cop, right? That's the shadow policy, right? It's not what's written. It's we're going to teach you how to do it our way. So policies that are written in a conference room, and then there's policies for the street. And that's where the disconnect is. And so although the shadow manual sounds like it could be problematic, I'd almost suggest to you that it's a good thing. And the reason that I say that is this. Maybe it's the fact that the people who own the shadow manual, the influencers on the road, if you will, the people that own that have never been brought into the policy writing process, but they've identified a better, more efficient, more effective way of doing something, but they've never been brought into that process. And so there's what's written in a conference room versus what maybe is more effective and efficient on the road. And so that's how you end up with two different policy manuals, one that's written and one that's unwritten.
But it should be a marriage. At some point, though, those two have to come together and become one.
And that's done through accreditation.
Exactly. So you talked about in many cases these are add-on duties, and I would have to imagine that had to be at least part of the catalyst for you starting your association. So why don't you take a second here and explain what the association is about and what its intended use is for.
Right. Thank you so much. So, yeah, so in November of 2024, I was working for a technology company, and we're still in the accreditation space. And I always had this idea of starting this nonprofit association for accreditation managers because I realized at that time that every other functional area of a police department, fire department, what have you, has their own associations to belong to. Whether it's ILETA for training officers or NASRO for FTOs or gang officers or even IACP for executives, but not for accreditation because it's always been thought of as other duties as assigned. So number one, I started this association to professionalize the position of accreditation. Number two, people asked, well, there are things out there called PACs, Police Accrediting Coalitions. It's where, you get along, you get into meetings with other accreditation managers from across your state and you help one another out, these informal groups. What's the difference? Well, the difference is this. PACs, or these coalitions, they work with other accreditation managers to ensure the success of the agency in the accreditation process. Our focus is completely different, okay? Our focus is on the people that are actually doing the work because we want to build up the professional competencies of the people that are actually doing the work because we believe that when you build them up as leaders, when you build their professional capacities, when you make them better advisors, when you make them more trusted leaders within their agencies, it's going to make their agencies better, it's going to make their accreditation stronger, and it's going to make accreditation as a whole better. And so accreditation, you'll find that a lot of what we talk about accreditation, but we talk about accreditation on the margins because accreditation is our vehicle for leadership. We want to build up the people that are actually doing the work because all too often, this is what we find. Those people that are assigned accreditation, they make it through one accreditation cycle, which is either 3 or 4 years. They either get promoted or they get cycled out, and then you bring in somebody else, and the learning curve starts all over again. And so it's basically the agency starting at ground zero again. Our position is, hey, let's create a professional position of accreditation manager, risk manager, whatever you want to label it. And they will be the professionals that will be advising their chiefs for the next 20 years.
Make it a career path.
Absolutely.
And make it something that people aspire to do, not that they're stuck with.
Absolutely. And along with professionalization, we learned going all the way back to, when policing started to be professionalized, is that along with that professionalization comes education. And there are not any degree programs right now in public safety accreditation because the one thing that makes us different than any other association, whether you look at ILETA, FTO, any of the other associations that I just mentioned, they all have kind of one thing in common, and that is they are specific to law enforcement. We're different. We're unlike anything else that's out there in the fact that we are public safety discipline agnostic. So what that means is our memberships make up law enforcement, fire, EMS, communications, corrections, and emergency management. All 6 public safety disciplines because accreditation is accreditation. So if you're doing law enforcement accreditation, you should be able to take those skills to a fire department and do fire accreditation. And if you're doing fire accreditation, you should be able to take those skills into the correction space and go do ACA accreditation. Okay. But in order to professionalize that position, we need to find the right university partner that's willing to work with us to develop some type of professional designation, develop some type of graduate certificate program, develop some type of undergraduate degree program or associate degree program in public safety accreditation, bring in classes in succession planning, bring in classes in leadership, bring in classes in planning and development, bring in classes in, auditing. So those are some of the things that we have planned in our 5-year plan.
Gotcha. So November 24. So fast forward here, a year and a half or so later, and you're about to run a first for your organization. Why don't you tell me about that?
Yeah, so we started accepting memberships in April of 2025, so it's been about 14 months, and we now have members in 31 different states, representing 32 different accrediting bodies in all 6 public safety disciplines. But you're absolutely right. This is the first year that we are going to be hosting the National Accreditation Conference, and that will be September 28th through the 30th in Columbus, Ohio. And I know it kind of pains me to say that, especially to you, seeing as how we both lived so dangerously close to Ann Arbor. So, but it's the first ever conference of its kind. We're going to be bringing together accreditation leaders from all 6 public safety disciplines to be able to learn from one another. Because you know what? Let's be honest with each other. We've both attended public safety conferences for so long, and some were outstanding, some were like business meetings. I've attended some that were focused on assessment, some that were focused on policies, and I mean, let's face it, some were just focused on having a good time and playing golf. This is going to be different. This is going to be focused on 40 different breakout sessions in 2.5 days of leadership and succession planning and communication and, executive presence. What does your boss expect from you? What does the chief expect from you? You're going to be there teaching, and I'd love for you to hear your thoughts on what you're going to be teaching. Risk management, influence, all of those things that you don't think about, but all of those things that'll help you build your personal brand and help you become more effective leaders and more effective advisors.
Well, Kevin, I just want to point something out here. ILEADA is one of my favorite conferences ever, right? And one of the things that I love about that conference right there is, especially when you get a new trainer to attend, and they're around these hundreds of trainers from all across the world, they find out that it's okay to be excited about being a trainer, and that you don't have to do this because you have to. You get the opportunity to do this, and I think that the conference you're going to be putting on is going to provide that same type of feeling on the accreditation side. You know what? It's okay for you to get excited about standards. It's okay for you to get excited about proofs, because when I get proofs, that a proof, it's in the name, right? It's proof that we don't just have a policy. It's proof that we live by the policy, that we perform to the standards. And I think if we start getting people excited about how this contributes to the professionalism of the organization and of the profession, then our professionals within it are going to be even better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, a lot of it is, and maybe you see this in the training world as well, but a lot of it is generational. As I'm working my way through this research project that I'm doing right now for my dissertation, I'm finding that a lot of organizational change is generational. A lot of it is now we have an entire group of employees that are coming in that don't know any better, as opposed to when I started the accreditation process at our agency, and then all of a sudden I had to explain to people that not everything bad in their life is a result of accreditation.
Yeah.
So there is that generational aspect to it that, I often said that if we could just get an hour in police academies to kind of explain what accreditation is, now you have an entire generation of people that are coming into the workforce that understand accreditation. The problem is the people that are already in the workforce that have 10, 15, 20 years on the job, they hear accreditation and they're like, how is this going to make my job more difficult?
So if you had a minute with a chief or a sheriff or a dispatch manager or fire chief, whatever, and you were going to explain to them what they would gain as a leader or as an organization by sending their accreditation folks to your conference, what would you tell them?
I would just tell them this, that this conference is not another accreditation conference. This conference is not about compliance. This conference is about leadership. They're going to meet hundreds of people from across the country. They are going to meet people who have solved problems that they haven't even encountered yet. They are going to meet people that are struggling with problems that their personnel can help them solve. It's not just networking. It's not just collecting business cards. This is an opportunity for you to invest in the professional development of your personnel. And it's not a huge investment. The conference is $399. The room rate is only $131 a night. It's not a huge investment. But are you willing to make that investment in your personnel? Because as we found out from that supervisor in the interview that went to every class the agency sent them to, okay, sometimes it's not the agency's responsibility for people's professional development, but I think it's incumbent upon the agency executives to pour into their employees and really pour into their professional development.
I've said this several times, and I believe this wholeheartedly. Training is an organizational responsibility, but learning is an individual responsibility. Take advantage of those opportunities you've been offered. Create some opportunities for you to be able to learn. So, if somebody wanted to get more information about the conference, where would be the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, well, hopefully you're able to put our website in the address in the show notes, but our website is thenaal.org. That's the association website. And if you go to thenaal.org/conference, that will take you to the conference page. It'll show you a number of the 40 some odd training offerings that will be offered that week. And you'll be able to register right directly from that site. Now we are running a special until September the 1st. So if your agency has multiple people that they want to send, if they pay for 3, they will get a 4th for free. And if and that's for the community. So if you have a fire department, a police department, EMS, if you have communications that's accredited, and you want to send one person from each one of those agencies, it's by community. So if you're if you're if you're a supervisor, bring your accreditation manager. If you're an accreditation manager, bring your chief. If you're a chief, bring the fire chief. If you're a fire chief, bring a communications supervisor. That special is based on community, not based on department.
And I would encourage leaders in organizations that supervise the accreditation manager to consider coming. You will gain a more in-depth understanding of what this is all about the greater picture, if you will, the higher elevation, and it will help you to lead your people better, and that will make the organization better.
Yeah, absolutely. We are really looking forward to it. All of our partners that are going to be in attendance, they are really looking forward to it. Again, Michael, you and everyone at Command Presence, we really thank you for being there, and look forward to hearing from you that day. and we just we're really excited about it. So we've got 90 days, and you know, don't ask yourself if you don't come. Just remember this is the first conference. So once we get up to year 10 or year 15, you can always look back and say I was at the first one.
And for those who are listening that will be attending, I want you to consider going into it. What can I present at the next one? Because a lot of times it's hard finding presenters for something. What can I do between now and then to develop a course that's going to be meaningful and practical, and I can become a subject matter expert on that so I can share that with others?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So let me hit on that real quick before we wrap up, if you don't care. So one of the things that I'm talking about in this building your brand is really like 5 pillars, and they're 5 pillars on how to build your brand: presenting at conferences, writing articles, joining associations, using LinkedIn, and volunteering. And so presenting at conferences like our conference, September 28th through the 30th. Writing articles. We have a magazine called Accreditation Quarterly. And if you want to write an article on leadership, on something, our article deadline submission date is July 15th. For our summer edition. The fall edition, the deadline is September the 15th. And you can just write an article, 500 to 1,000 words, email it to admin at thenaal.org. Send it to me. The best way to start building your brand is to be published in a national trade magazine, just like the ILEADA Journal. Join an association like the National Association for Accreditation Leadership, or ILEADA. Our individual memberships are only $125 a year. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so even if your agency doesn't pay for it, you can still write it off as a tax deduction. Use LinkedIn. Write on LinkedIn. Comment on LinkedIn. Use LinkedIn as the professional resource that it was designed to. And then volunteer. Once you get involved in an association, whether it's ILEADA or whether it's our association, volunteer with them. Join the conference committee. Join the professional development committee. Join the membership committee. Get involved. All of those things help you build your personal brand. All of those things help you influence culture, shape strategy, build trust so that you become more effective at your job.
And just a quick shout out as we wrap up. Instructor Z is going to be one of your presenters there. And folks, you talking about one of the best instructors on presenting and building your brand and doing things. You will, seeing him is enough reason for you to register for the conference. I mean, he's unbelievable. So I would encourage you, if you don't know who he is, go and look him up on LinkedIn. As Kevin said, that's a great resource. And folks, there's something very cleansing, if you will, about writing, because it forces you to think more deeply about the topic that you're writing about, and it will provide a clarity that you can't find anywhere else. And if you listen to the podcast at all, you know that I'm a music guy. And there are times where I will pick a song and I'll let YouTube or Apple Music or whatever take me down this rabbit hole. And it's amazing what you find down there. And when you start writing on a platform like LinkedIn, it starts rabbit holes. You think the conversation is going to go one way, but all of a sudden it goes in a direction that you never considered. And oftentimes that direction that you never considered is actually more valuable and more useful than your original intention. So I wholeheartedly support Kevin's assertion there. But Kevin, in closing, do you have anything you want to say to us?
No, I just thank you very much. I appreciate everything that you and Command Presence and all the people involved do to help us get the word out. I look forward to seeing you at the end of September. And if anyone wants more information about the conference, they can hit up our website and see the conference for themselves and register directly from the website.
Very good. And we'll be sure to include contact information for the association and for you in the show notes for our listeners. So for my listeners, building your brand, increasing your credibility is how we go about increasing our influence. And remember, good influence is really dependent on the person, whether the content's good or bad. So be a professional, increase your platform, increase your breadth of knowledge so that people will listen to you so that you can have a positive impact where you're at. And as you go throughout your days, I want you to remember, as we always close, strive to be the leader that you wish you had.
Thank you for joining us for the Faces of Leadership podcast, presented by Command Presence Training. A special thank you to the leaders who share their experiences and lessons with our audience. For more episodes, resources, and training opportunities, visit commandpresence.net. And remember, leadership is about people in action. Strive to be the leader you wish you had. We'll see you next time.